In the world of Dungeons and Dragons, ambition often burns bright in the heart of villains, their schemes as vast as empires in their quest for domination. Yet there exists one whose dark aspirations cast no shadow above, for they are rooted deep beneath the surface, where no light dares tread. Halaster Blackcloak is a terrifying thing, a name that conjures fear not because he's the archetypical villain, but because he is the unknown. Some call him evil, a mad wizard with power untold. Others know him merely as the Watcher in the Weave, an observer content in his solitude. He does not vie for the world's throne, nor does he lust for its destruction. His domain, Undermountain, is one of twisted experiments, a place where the fabric of reality is stitched together with arcane thread. If you dare to leave Undermountain be, he will pay you no mind. Halaster, unfortunately or fortunately, met his demise very recently within the D&D mythos, or so the tales go. But in a world where magic weaves life and death into one, can such a being ever truly be gone? And we begin Halaster's story not as Halaster Blackcloak, but instead a Halaster, a tale of a wizard who came to the mountains in ages past to make his home in isolations from the societies of men. Some say Halaster came from Netheril, others from the east, still others hold that he hailed from the Cradle Lands, vanished human kingdoms now buried in ruin. All civilizations long gone. It is said that Elminster has researched Halaster to indicate that Halaster is the Mad Wizard's given name, while the grander Halaster was the name he took for himself when he became a powerful wizard. Halaster is said to have devised many powerful spells, perfected some processes, and items now widely known and used in wizarding circles. Whatever the truth about Halaster's origins, the stories all tell the same thing. He suddenly left off with all dealings of men over 1,000 years ago and came to Mount Waterdeep to make his home, accompanied by 7 apprentices. Halaster summoned and bound fell creatures from other planes to build their traditional wizard tower for him, ringed with a stout stone rampart enclosing an extensive garden, paddock, and warehouses. The 7, as the apprentices are named in historical texts, worked the fields, dwelling in lesser turrets along the inside of the ring wall. They continued their magical studies, but saw their dreadmaster, Halaster, little. Halaster's dealings with his summoned servitors changed him. The more Halaster avoided human contact and dealt with other planar creatures, the stranger he became. He grew grim, given to long silences, sudden rages, and erratic behavior. He had his creatures dig storage caves, additional laboratories, and long exit tunnels beneath his tower. This work went on for decades. At length, the tunnels broke into the old dwarven dwellings called the Underhalls. The Underhalls were large and grand and built to the scale of tall men rather than dwarves. They guarded 2 ancient mithril mines that extended far beneath Mount Waterdeep. After the dwarves, the Underhalls became the lairs for the Duergar and Dark Elves, who were still in residence when Halaster found his way into them. As soon as the mithril was worked out, the Duergar moved on. In the days of the Fallen Kingdom, Halaster himself is thought to have eradicated the last remnants of all drow in the Undermountain. The 7 wrote often in diaries of their master's increasingly dangerous expeditions against the drow. They called it Halaster's Hunt, which essentially meant a berserk raid of willful slaughter. The 7 also hint at some captured drow being transformed and enslaved into Halaster's service. With the drow gone or magically twisted into grotesque servant creatures, Halaster banished his summoned slaves back to their home place and moved entirely into the subterranean ways, abandoning his tower to the elements, leaving his apprentices. He left traps in the tower waiting for his apprentices, baited with powerful magics and enigmatic messages hinting that true power awaited them below. And so, one by one, as their courage and capabilities took them, the 7 went below in search of their master, and they were met with something incredible, a strange, labyrinthine, and dangerous world. Halaster stored his treasures, experiments, victuals, and necessities, magical items, and servants in all of these underways. Here, he thought himself safe from all prying intrusions, theft, hostile brigands of all sorts, as well as his sorcerous foes, including his Seven. Halaster sent his guardian creatures and traps against the Seven. He did this to both test his students and test the defenses of his new home. 2 of his apprentices died in this process, and Halaster, with still some sanity left, stopped the attacks and enlisted the rest of his students' help to add to the security of his underground realm. He reworked his spells so that the apprentices had limited access to areas of Undermountain, though there was one apprentice who survived her descent into the Undermountain and returned to the surface realms. She was the only one to break away from Halaster as she fled the area, Jessira Kesselharp, who eventually became Magister of Myth Draenor, and a lot of these tellings are due to her survival. The other apprentices either perished or went insane living within the mad Halaster's dungeon. And since the abandonment of the tower and the creation of Undermountain, much time has passed. The settlement above became the famous city of Waterdeep, and soon many adventurers from the city discovered Halaster's tower and the initial entrances to the dungeon beneath. As time passed, Halaster and his apprentices encountered an increasing number of expeditions by armed adventurers within his subterranean lair. After all of these years and isolation, Halaster's preoccupation with his dark stronghold allegedly affected his mind, and he used the halls and numerous magical gates to give him free rein to his rather curious hobbies of roaming various planes and collecting monsters. He enlisted these monsters to further defend the upper levels of his halls, and he used these upper halls as a killing gallery for intruders, as he continued moving his own dwelling deeper and deeper into the vast and endless darkness. Deep into the bowels of Faerun, Halaster grew to be a great and terrible old man who dabbled in the magics that buy immortality. To continue his work relatively unmolested, he created a double, a clone, and infected it with a wasting disease, and let it die where it would be found by patrols from Waterdeep, roaming the halls of Undermountain. He then amused himself by watching parties of thieves, wanderers, soldiers of fortune, and magical rivals fall afoul of his gathered monsters and the clever death traps he had devised. He found humor where many found comfort in the mistaken belief that he was dead and they could pillage the wizard's dungeons unopposed. No one in Waterdeep or Undermountain today is positive if Halaster still lives or if he is dead. Many who venture deep into Undermountain say he lives on. They say he watches from the halls. In all this time, Halaster lives on. He has devised many ways to keep himself alive. He views Undermountain as his own deadly playground, a means to bring his entertainment as well as new companions, knowledge, magical spells, and items. And by all accounts, it is said that he is content to rule his demented but lethal domain, constantly tinkering with its contents, inhabitants, and the network of gates he maintains there and beyond. Halaster is no doubt one of the most powerful humanoids throughout all of Dungeons & Dragons and Forgotten Realms. Though unlike some of the other villains, arch-liches such as Vecna, or other powerful mages like Tasha, he doesn't want to rule the world. He never overreaches, he is not ambitious. He is very content staying in Undermountain and letting the over-ambitious work their ways to him. At this point, he has gathered immense forces and armies recruited from other planes. It is said that Halaster can generate illusory images of himself anywhere within Undermountain at any time, and these phantoms that he generates can be used by Halaster to observe and even cast spells through, and of course communicate with. At any time, at least 9 and as many as 30 of these phantom Halasters exist, roving the halls of Undermountain, and Halaster can also exchange any of these phantoms with his true body instantaneously without any visual change or alteration. If you are an adventurer roaming the halls, there is a good chance Halaster knows where you are at all times, and if you run into a creature that looks like Halaster, it may or may not be him, but it certainly could be him at any time that he chose commanding one of the largest layers and regions of any creature or humanoid within all of D&D. Yet it is said that he can monitor gates up to 100 miles away from his complex, and even control them. And even though it is said that Halaster never leaves Undermountain, it is of course very well known that he is an experienced planewalker himself, concerned with all of the creatures he is convinced to come to Undermountain. He is one of the most well-traveled and practiced creatures from the material plane. No self-respecting fiend would willingly volunteer to sit in somebody's dungeon forever, just waiting for clueless sods to stumble along so it could put them into the dead book. Even more certainly, none would agree to become some prime wizard's slave. But a few leather-headed lower planar creatures did stumble unwittingly into Undermountain, and Halaster traveled the lower planes and used his spells to bind even more to his will. So none of these were very well convinced or coerced, more like tricked and forced. And it is said that a lot of the portals he used to get from Undermountain to other planes remained open for creatures to wander in and out of. And most of these portals lead to the lower planes. He wanted fiends and nasty horrors to infest Undermountain, and even servants to come help him make his dungeons even larger. Halaster and his apprentices embarked on a massive campaign to fill the entire dungeon with all manner of monsters and treasure. Later on in D&D in 3rd edition, we get some unsettling news about Halaster. It is said that in response to a looming arcane disaster, which later is known as the Spell Plague, Halaster attempted a ritual that resulted in the Mad Mage's death. This long rolling earthquake struck Waterdeep shortly after dawn. The city sustained little physical damage, but a number of people across the city were struck by fearsome mental visions of a screaming, bearded man whose eyes blazed with rage, sorrow, and swimming stars. The descriptions match that of Halaster, the Mad Mage of Undermountain. People of arcane talent struck by the visions also report scenes of destruction in the vast maze. Pillars cracking and tumbling, rifts and chasms opening, and surging explosions of blue-white sparks. All of these mages soon concurred. It was clear that Halaster destroyed himself while attempting that ritual of tremendous power, and in that moment of death, hurled desperate visions and mysterious compulsions to adventures and persons of magical power throughout all of Faerun. And in the lore and canon of D&D, that is the last we truly see of Halaster. But if you've been listening at all, you would know that would be a shocking and surprising end to the Mad Mage. And in fact, we do gain a little insight from a dragon magazine that tells more than some of the editions say of Halaster. It is said that he did not just create that one clone that was told before, the one that he used to fake his own death. Instead, he created untold numbers of clones to house his identity in case his body was met with disaster. The clones were kept in stasis and hidden in safe places throughout Undermountain and the lower reaches of Waterdeep. Halaster expected death at every turn, but it is said that not even he foresaw his destruction at his own hands, and when he lost control of that ritual, his essence was cast across the plains, and before he could find his way back to one of the clones, the Spell Plague struck. Only Halaster knows for certain what happens next. But there is a character within this edition of Dragon Magazine, one that you can embody. One of Halaster's clones, and you awake within a safe house filled with the Mad Mage's writings, texts meant to help orient himself upon assuming a new body. But something went wrong. You are not Halaster, your body is far different, and your personality is from a different source. Yet, Halaster is there too. You can hear his maniacal laughter bubbling from the recesses of your mind. You can hear his ramblings, his whispers. You can feel his madness, contesting your own personality. With this supplement, it is clear this has not just happened to one creature, but all of Halaster's countless clones. And it is not necessarily the story with all of them, but surely many of these clones are back and have a very large piece of Halaster within them. The rest from here is speculation. But with no other information about what this ritual Halaster was casting was for, what threat he was protecting himself against, It seems odd that the thousands of years old Halaster, who had been at the top of his game as the mad creature that he was, would choose to destroy himself before the exact moment the spell plague struck. The only moment where he could not re-enter one of his clones. I think instead, this was something that was purposeful. Whatever Halaster's endgame, it is possible he's moving beyond Undermountain, though it is very clear he is not gone. Not completely. And so while legends speak of an end, a grim finality that befell the Mad Mage of Undermountain, the labyrinth of Undermountain's depths still stir with a life of their own. And in the spell plague, where magic itself was asunder, the echoes of Halaster Blackcloak's laugh were but barely hushed. Clones, schemes, and mysteries left unsolved weave the certainty that in the arcane-veined halls of his eternal dungeon, Halaster's presence endures. Ever watchful, ever scheming, ever mad, the ever insane Halaster.